Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. My husband, Rich, retired last year after teaching for 20 years at Laurel School for Girls in Shaker Heights. Throughout his time there, the school engaged in various initiatives to encourage girls to achieve their full potential. One of my favorite campaigns was built around a simple little word, the word yet. When students would feel frustrated and say things like, "I'm just not good at math," or "There's no way I can give a speech in front of my classmates," they were encouraged instead to say, "I'm just not good at math yet," or "There's no way I can give a speech in front of my classmates yet." In this way, they would be reminded that, with effort, they could expand their skills and their knowledge. They were not stuck and limited by their present talents and know-how, and had the potential to grow and become more than they could ever imagine. For all of us, this is a good reminder, neatly summed up in that catchy little phrase, "Be patient. God isn't finished with me yet." The events in our gospel passage this morning take place after Jesus has called his disciples to journey with him, and they have been traveling the countryside, having left their former professions. They are in the process of learning what it means to be followers. They have heard him preach and have witnessed many of his miracles, from healing diseases to casting out demons to calming storms. By the time we get to today's story, we don't know how long exactly these disciples have been with Jesus, but my guess is that it's probably just been a matter of months. I'm sure they would not have been considered experts in the field of discipleship at this point. And yet, here Jesus seems to sense an urgency in sending them out to do the work he has called them to. In his words, "The harvest is plentiful, the laborers are few." We all know that when harvest is ready, there is no time to wait. Jesus' heart has broken open for so many people living with suffering, helplessness, disease, and injustice. But he was only one person and couldn't be everywhere for everyone. So he commissions the disciples, asking them to emulate him. While we don't know how his disciples actually responded to this summons, my guess is it's likely they said, "Are you kidding? We're not ready for that." This story has me reflecting back on my own ministerial journey. I sensed my call to ministry just after converting from my Methodist faith to Catholicism. So I ended up at Ursuline College, a Catholic college, getting a master's in ministry. Subsequently, I left the Catholic Church in 2005 and ended up becoming involved in a UCC church, where my sense of call to ordained ministry came through my saying yes to various opportunities in that church. I took classes to fill in gaps in my education and Stephen ministry training to help with some pastoral care, and became a licensed minister in my congregation so I could officiate weeknight communion services. That and some pulpit supply was about the extent of my experience in ministry. In 2009, I received a call, a literal phone call, from a neighboring church, asking if I could fill in, not just for a Sunday service, but as their sole pastor for 6 months. I knew that congregation a bit because I had worked there as their nursery attendant 20 years before. Not exactly a ringing endorsement for ministry. All I could think of was, I can't be a solo pastor yet. But the harvest was ready, as it were, and I didn't have much time to think about it. So 3 weeks after that phone call, I found myself laboring in the field of that church community as their pastor. Those disciples may not have felt that they were ready yet. But when many of them who were fishermen first heard the call from Jesus to follow him, they immediately cast aside their nets. Now Jesus was asking them to cast aside their yets. It was time. Perhaps they were not quite fully disciple material yet, but as they did the work and served others in love, they grew in faith, they grew in confidence, and they grew in their talents. Yet is a great word for reminding us that we have ever more potential, that we do not have to remain where we are right now. But sometimes the word yet is also the word that stalls us, that enables us to put off our actions. Those disciples could have said, I know it's harvest time, but I'm not ready yet. However, when they responded to Jesus' summons, he equipped them for their ministry. For it is said that God does not call the equipped, but rather equips the called. When we say an initial yes to the call to show compassion for the suffering, to see the holy and sacred in each and every person, to work toward the realization of the dominion of God in this world, then God will equip us to go out into the world, building that beloved community, the blessed kingdom, as it is sometimes called. Just as Jesus said to his disciples, cure those who are sick, raise those who are dead, cleanse those with leprosy, cast out demons. He calls us to go out in the same way, summoning us to cure the sickness of injustice, to raise the deadened hopes of those who are despairing, to cast out the demons of racism, sexism, ableism, of xenophobia and homophobia. It's harvest time. Time to do some clear cutting. But laboring in the fields of peace and justice is tough. We can feel like we're attacked from all sides, like we're too small to make a difference, like our words and actions won't amount to anything. And yet, I believe that focusing on one of the words in our passage today makes all the difference in our work. That word is compassion. We are told that when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. Compassion means literally to suffer with. That was Jesus' experience when he encountered the downtrodden, the sick, the hopeless. His heart broke, and it broke open. Compassion is what motivated his ministry. What I have found to be true in my own life is this. I can be moved to compassion by the suffering of those I see on television, or those I hear speak at a presentation, or those I read about in newspapers or in books. But it is when I form close relationships with those suffering people, when I hear their stories and engage in conversation, that is when my heart is truly moved and broken open. For example, 30 or so years ago, I would have told you that I didn't know any people who identified as LGBTQ. But now, looking back, I know that the truth is I didn't know I knew any people who were in the LGBTQ community. And why would I? My attitude back then was more one of judgment than of compassion. So why would they come out to me? But today I count many of my closest friends as folk from that community. My life is so enriched by these relationships. I have listened to their stories, their struggles, their fears. Although I myself am a straight woman, I can imagine, I can suffer with them in their anger, their despair, their anxiety for their future as more and more bills are passed and legislation enacted, whittling away at their dignity, their freedom, their rights. My heart is moved to compassion, and I find myself marching with them, standing by them, speaking out for them, and aligning myself with them. This past Monday, our Federated Church Social Justice Advocacy Ministry team showed the movie Pride as one of our events celebrating Pride Month. It's based on a true event about an unlikely alliance between the coal miners and the lesbians and gays in England during the coal miners' strike. Just before the 1984 Pride Parade in London, the leader of the gay pride group had been watching the news and learning about the plight of the striking miners. They were being harassed by law enforcement, vilified by the government authorities, and losing their livelihood. They were suffering. His heart was moved with compassion, so during the parade, he handed out buckets to the marchers to collect money and began shouting, "Lesbians and gays support the miners." So they called themselves LGSM for short. Their parade was small, but they collected some funds and continued collecting on the streets in the days and weeks that followed. It took a while and lots of phone calls for them to find a group of miners who would even actually accept money from them because they were gay. But eventually they found a community in Wales. The story of their meeting, the resistance in the mining community to the lesbians and gays, and then the eventual acceptance and friendship is told in a poignant, humorous way. When one of the leaders of the miners named Di first meets Mark, the leader of LGSM, he says, "Truth be told, you're the first gay I've ever met in my life." To which Mark answers, "As far as you're aware." When Di comes to London to a gay venue to thank LGSM for their contributions, he says to the crowd, "When you're in a battle with an enemy that's so much bigger, so much stronger than you, to find out you had a friend you never knew existed, well, that's the best feeling in the world." Support from this unlikely quarter made all the difference in casting out the demons of despair, in healing the hopelessness for those striking miners. Eventually, bridges were built, deep relationships formed, and the miners reciprocated later to support their gay and lesbian friends. The movie is available on DVD from the library, and I highly recommend it. It's a story of healing and hope, born of compassion. This month, we also celebrate Juneteenth. Truth be told, I had never heard about this holiday until a few years ago. We never learned about it in school, despite the fact that the Black community has been celebrating this day of freedom for over 100 years. I guess I never thought about the reality that when we commemorate Independence Day on the anniversary of the 4th of July, 1776, millions of us enslaved Americans could not celebrate independence because they were not free. Here's a short video clip with a bit of the history of Juneteenth.
The significance of Juneteenth. On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed enslaved people in the rebelling Confederate States. On June 19, 1865, news that the war had ended and that all enslaved were free finally reached Galveston, Texas, the city where the last group of enslaved people was. It took 2.5 years before the oppression of enslaved people ended. As much as it is a celebration, June 19th, or Juneteenth, is a reminder of delayed freedom and its promises for the Black community. How should we participate? As Christ followers, let us be compelled toward understanding those who have different life experiences. Here's how we can make a difference every day of the year. Educate yourself and others on the history of Juneteenth. Learn the current struggles of the Black community and take action. Seek out and buy from Black-owned businesses and brands. Invest in Black communities. Be intentional with speaking up and out against racism in your spheres of influence. Remember, the fight for freedom may be won, but the fight for equality continues today.
Indeed it does. And we are called to educate ourselves and work towards a more just world for our brothers, siblings, and sisters of color. Delving deeper into this history, I learned that the Emancipation Proclamation could only be enforced if Union troops had captured territory in the Confederacy. Only about 500,000 enslaved people out of 3.9 million got their freedom through that proclamation. As we heard in the video, June 19th, 1865 marks the day that the last enslaved people in America were freed because the Union Army came into possession of this final territory in Texas. A year later, the former enslaved began marking this anniversary, and they have been celebrating ever since. But we know that racism is still rampant in our country, and personally, I have to confess, I am woefully undereducated in this area. And while I am compassionate and engage in anti-racism studies and activities, I don't fight nearly hard enough. And that may be in part because I don't have any really close friends who are Black. Yet. That is my growing edge, and I hope I can expand my circle of friends and widen my compassion. We all have growing edges. We all have places where we do not yet feel ready to serve, but that should not stop us from serving our neighbors, all our neighbors, with compassion. Friends, it's harvest time. Let us be of good courage. Let us labor for the kingdom, ready or not, trusting that God will equip us for the good work we are being called to do. I close with this timely reminder from Saint Teresa of Avila. Christ has no body now, but ours. No hands, no feet on earth, but ours. Ours are the eyes through which he looks compassion on this world. Ours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Ours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Ours are the hands, ours are the feet, ours are the eyes. We are his body. Christ has no body now on earth, but ours. Amen.